Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
You know, the other week, last week, there was a networking event going on in town, and there were a lot of networking organizations there, and a lot of people from my organization, AmSpirit Business Connections, going to be there. And I got to be honest, I didn't go. And, you know, life's full of excuses. And I guess somewhat in my defense, I had, in the 2 days prior, I had been in 5 different cities for 7 different meetings, all presentations. I was tired, you know, it was towards the end of a week. It was a Thursday night, but I still could have gone. It wasn't like I was on my deathbed or anything like that. And, you know, sitting here now, I look back and I kind of kick myself because I talked to people who were there, but I just talked myself out of it. And I think that we're all prone to doing these sorts of things. And we have this relationship, and it's an important relationship, and it's a relationship with ourselves. And today I have on the program Oren Lewin, and what Oren does is he helps frustrated and overwhelmed business owners understand how they create their beliefs and emotions, and how they can change them in order to fuel higher performance behavior. So we're really going to kind of dive into this whole notion of our relationships with ourselves, and should be a fun call. Your most important relationship is with yourself, and if you can, I don't want to say master it, but if you can get better with that, other things fall into place. So, Oren, welcome.
Thank you very much, Frank. I'm excited to be here.
So, you know, it's interesting. I read an article in Psychology Today yesterday. Sounds kind of funny. Psychology Today yesterday. It was on our personalities and how our personalities change. And there was there had a bunch of different authors in there with different segments. And one of the segments was, can you change your personality? Can you change who you are? And a lot of people think, no, you can't. And what they said in there is, well, you can. You know, they've got studies that show that if you're, for example, if you're an introvert, there are things you can do to kind of push yourself out of that. And I've talked to other people who have helped push people out of fear of heights, all sorts of phobias, and you deal with this stuff all the time. So
yeah,
I don't know what you think on that, but that's a good jumping off point in my opinion.
Absolutely. And it is really interesting how I guess, for lack of a better word, how organic we are. That just as, you know, you make a garden and then you can tear up the plants, you can put new plants. In a way, our thoughts and our patterns and our beliefs are changeable as well. And I think, you know, so when I work with someone, Frank, usually oftentimes it's someone who says, man, I do have limiting self-beliefs. I fall into analysis paralysis, procrastination. And then we peel that back and we say, okay, what's going on underneath the hood? And let's get you functioning at a high level, at a higher performance level, and being the person. So you're not doing things that you regret. So you're not looking back and kicking yourself, but you can learn from those experiences.
That's interesting. And those things do get in the way. I was listening to a podcast. I won't get into the details of it, but there's a guy who's really sentenced to spend the rest of his life in jail, but there's a lot of evidence that he's innocent. Now he's in the U.S. system. I know you're in British Columbia, our friends up north, but in the U.S. system, you have state court and you have federal court. And every time he goes to federal court, his appeals and his appeal for a new trial is denied. And there's speculation of a lot of corruption. And then if he went to federal court, the federal court is not, you know, federal judges are appointed, they're appointed for life. And so they don't get into the politics as much as a state court judge who the politics. I'm setting up a lot here. The politics, they got to get reelected. So they got to kind of play the game, right? And playing the game, it's not a winning thing to give this guy a new trial. The federal court, they're going to look at the evidence and say, yeah, this guy gets a new trial. The defendant, the person, the convicted at this point, doesn't want to go to federal court, because if he goes to federal court, it's a one and done. But by being in state court, every 6 months he can go and appeal. Just kind of okay, we'll give you a wink. You can get another appeal. It's going to probably be denied, but you get another appeal. And he's willing to go through arguably the rest of his life with these appeals that probably will, never be positive. But he probably has a better than 50-50 chance in federal court. But he doesn't want to take that gamble because the risk of loss is so big. It's over if he loses there. That's a limiting belief.
That is interesting. That makes me think of our relationship with money. How oftentimes in investing, I've heard it said that we fear losing more than we want to gain. And so taking a risk, generally, even if the risk is good, a person who will fear losing will not take that risk.
Yeah. No, there are a lot of studies that show that that we're averse of loss. I don't know, but and maybe that's not a limiting belief. Maybe like, hell, he's in prison. Who am I to say? But it's just interesting how we do get in our own ways. I mean, look, with my story, I mean, I'm Mr. Network, but I'm here to tell you that I have this introverted side of me that I can only do so much. Now I have friends, they can't get enough of it, right? If they don't have somebody sitting within 6 feet of them at any given time, they're just going stir crazy. For me, it's like, you know what? It's Friday. I'm gonna go home and hang out with my wife. Maybe one of my kids will be there, and that's plenty.
Yeah, and probably. So one of the things that I talk with, and it doesn't sound like this is a big problem for you, like this is a repetitive issue, but what I would do is I would say, okay, so you were caught up in the moment, and you were making a decision, really likely based on how you were feeling at the time.
Right.
And so, but if you had stopped and if you had taken a step back and you would have said, hey, what am I feeling? You would have had a self-awareness of your different options, and you would have said, okay, what do I really want here? You would have made a choice that you would be happy with long term. Right.
Yeah. Well, in all honesty, in retrospect, yeah, I'm disappointed in myself for not going. But I'm happy I didn't go because they broke out the karaoke machine. I'm just like, hey, that's not, I don't drink. The bar thing's not really for me. The karaoke thing just puts it over the top. So I would have gone 15 minutes, shook some hands, said hello, met who I needed to meet, and the karaoke machine would have come out. And that might be a limiting belief, and I don't care, Oren. I really don't care. I'm not a karaoke guy. Go ahead.
So when I'm thinking about limiting beliefs, oftentimes, so my story, Frank.
Yeah,
so
please.
I grew up in a small town in northern British Columbia, and in this community, so I was on a farm 30 kilometers outside of town being like 2,000 population of 2,000 people, and so I homeschooled until I was grade 5. And when I went to school, there was a number of things that happened. Compounding on really being in a community where there's not a lot of self-awareness and emotional awareness and intelligence. So homeschooling for 5 years, I was a little bit behind. And so I entered into school, my in grade 5, I had difficulties with math, with my times tables. And so I was a year behind. And so there was just then a sense that, I'm not as good academically as the other kids, right? Socially, because I spent so much of my time, outside on the farm, I was socially behind. And I just felt, I'm just not as able to relate to people as good as the other kids. And
Well,
then as well,
and they had known each other for 5 years, arguably, if not longer, right?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
And then also academically, right? Academics, or not academically, sorry. Athletically, sports was a huge thing in my school, nicknamed the Dutch school because we had like volleyball players and basketball players who would always go to the provincials and win second or third or first place. And yet, so I had the fitness, right? I grew up on a farm, but I didn't have that coordination.
Mm.
And so I was always a bench warmer. And so these things, compiled with, the rest of life, undoubtedly, but I just had this sense going into life, going through school, that there's successful people out there, but I'm probably not one of them. And I didn't have much that I expected from my life, that I didn't expect that I was going to really do great things or change the world. And so, I buried myself in video games and in novels.
Mm-hmm.
And so this really was a situation where I had these limiting beliefs about who I was that caused life just to be dim. It wasn't very bright. I didn't expect much of life, and I didn't think that life expected much of me. And and so as I entered into the ministry for a number of years, for a decade. And so I did have a deep sense of purpose, a deep sense of passion and desire, but still these limiting beliefs caused me to almost sabotage myself, right? If I was in conversations, right, I didn't think that I was able to connect in the way that I wanted to, and so I wouldn't, right? If I'm going to do a speech, I would have such a difficult time making that speech because I didn't believe that I would be able to do a good speech. And so these things, created this immense resistance. And so that was my experience. So when I'm talking about limiting beliefs, oftentimes these are big things that really have had this big impact on my life.
Right.
And so when I'm talking with other people, leaders, or my one client who's a manager of a nonprofit, does great work, and yet often had this difficulty, these senses, these huge negative self-talk that I'm not enough, I'm not a good enough leader, I'm never doing enough, for the organization. And so it's like, okay, let's unpack this so that you can actually like yourself and you can have a confidence and a joy in what you're doing and in who you are.
Interesting. So is it fair to say that a lot of people, well, the term I have been hit with, can't see the water they're swimming in?
Yes.
They just feel like this is, oh, you did it. You said it yourself. There are great people. It's not me, for whatever reason.
Yeah. And what happens is that becomes our comfort zone. We become comfortable there.
Yeah.
And so then changing becomes not only a difficult thing, but something that we don't even think outside of that box.
Right.
And so, a lot of what so I would ask the question, like, how do we form those beliefs? How have you formed those beliefs? And usually, so there's a high level, when you think of identity, who you are, right? Well, when I think of who I am, okay, I'm a father as of 16 days ago.
Yep.
I'm a small business owner. I'm a trainer on mindset. I'm a son. I'm a Canadian, right? All of these things, which say a little bit about my position in life, but they don't really say how I do any of those things.
Right.
And so what helpful area to really deal with that is on to chunk it down to, am I hardworking? Am I successful? Am I flexible? These would be levels of self-beliefs that really make a big impact. When someone forms negative beliefs about these things, those are the ones that have the big difference. And these are the ones that I help change and shift for people.
Do you look at people's relationships with their parents? I mean, I guess the question for you, how did you view your parents? Because if I obviously you lived on a farm, so your parents are farmers. You know, sounds sexist. I assume your mother homeschooled you. You know, but your view of them, you know.
Yeah, I would say yes, but it's not counseling. Counseling or you know, therapy would probably take that, you know, to a deeper level.
Sure.
I do recognize, so when you've formed a belief about yourself, generally we form our beliefs by what we're focusing on and how we're interpreting it. And so what are the situations where you have done a good job? For example, you know, if I'm talking about flexibility, when are the times that I have been flexible? And noticing those. And so a year ago, this was the reason why I bring up flexibility is because that was one for me. And I would have said, I'm not a flexible person. And so I focused on parts of my life where I didn't feel like I was flexible, where I was more rigid, and how that played out. Then if I made a mistake during the day, it would take off my whole day, right? I'd shut down the computer, I'd go for a walk, I'd have to journal and really kind of process through it. But changing that belief, learning to focus on different information in my life, times when I have been flexible, actually has enabled me to then believe differently that, hey, I am a flexible person. And so now, say I make a mistake, well, okay, recognizing as an entrepreneur, it's 95% mistakes, right? It's okay, it's something to write down, something to change, to adapt, and then to move forward. And so it takes now 5 minutes. I don't write off my day now when I make a mistake, because that little belief has made such a big difference.
I get you. What are some of the challenges you see people facing, some of the limiting beliefs?
So usually it doesn't come out as limiting beliefs. It comes out as procrastination.
Okay.
Or, you know, I struggle with analysis paralysis. I'm disorganized. And so these under the hood things then result in, you know, the things that we notice.
Gotcha.
But in order to identify the beliefs, actually it takes generally a bit of unpacking.
Okay, I got you. It just reminds me of somebody I knew years ago who could never get his work done.
Yeah.
He was an attorney. He needed to be accountable for 5 hours a day of actual client billings, in an 8-9 hour day. And a lot of the work was handed to him. But I remember talking to him saying, yeah, I can never get it done. It's like, how can you not get it done? It's just, you either do it or you don't. It's just that simple. You just don't stop until you get it done. And in his mind is, you know, there was this end of the day, and he just, I don't know. And I think it was a little of both of what you say, analysis paralysis, probably a little disorganization, probably a little bit of procrastination.
Yeah.
But you know, the reason I brought the story up about the gentleman who's in prison is sometimes I feel like that's what holds people back too, is that they feel like there's only so many opportunities out there. And if they move too fast and approach all those opportunities and they're all no's, then they're done, right? I don't know where else to turn at this point. But if you give them a list of 1,000 people to contact, or they get the belief in their head that, you know what, yeah, these are 3 people in front of me, but I know there's another 300 somewhere else out there. I don't have the names right now, but I know if these 3 are no's or don't move forward like I want them to, I know there's another 297 out there, you know? And so they're going to move forward much, with much more courage, I should say, as opposed to, geez, I really have to get these 3 right. I see that as well in people.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. There's the self-awareness of the different options that we have really gives a person that emotional agility, that flexibility to choose.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I could tie some of my stories back to just what you just said, and having that mindset that there's not many options here for me, and growing in that self-awareness, saying, no, the world is not, my life is not a straight line from one point to another point. It's more like a map or like a territory, and I'm navigating life, and I have so many choices I can make.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's absolutely true. And I remind business people I talk to that there are, 8 billion people on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
There are enough out there for you to have a business, and you to have, meaningful clients. Because I'm just of the mind that a lot of people don't fail in business. Yes, there are people who fail, they run out of cash. But for the most part, people who do what you do, it's not an issue of cash. It's not like you have all these employees you need to pay, or it's all going to come crumbling down, or, be repossessed. It's just an issue of just feeling like there's hope. You lose hope. It's really what it boils down to.
Yeah.
Well, let's shift gears here a little bit. Let's talk about your practice and the types of people you're, looking to connect with, how the listeners can help you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we talked about beliefs. Another area that I really delve into with my clients is values, is what's really important to you, and really getting specific with outlining that. And that gives a person a huge difference as far as clarity goes. And then as well, the resourcefulness, the emotional agility, and building, moving from emotionally fractured to emotionally agile, being able to respond to the kicks of life and the problems.
Yeah.
And so with my package, my program, Frank, is called Peak Performance. And I really help a person to understand how they've created their inner world, and give them the tools, equip them so that they can be their best self, so they can find that inner freedom, they can be productive and live authentically and really be who they want to be. And so that's what I'm excited about. That's what I'm passionate about. And so that's what my business is. And also I'm offering that to companies as well, to train their teams, train their employees. So to take this and to branch it out for more people.
What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
So my email address is olewin@gmail.com. I think you can put that in the notes.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can do that. Or I was going to put in the lionheartleadership.ca.
And my website is lionheartleadership.ca.
Okay. I generally get that. I assume people can get your email through that website, correct?
Yeah.
So I generally opt to people remember Gmail. So it's, I guess the spelling of your name. I'll get the web address in there. It just seems to be easiest. Well, Oren, I really appreciate your time today. This has been insightful.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today, and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.